Most people think of JP Morgan as just another rich banker from history. But what if I told you that without him, America's entire financial system might have collapsed before it even got off the ground? From single-handedly bailing out the US economy to manipulating entire industries behind closed doors, JP Morgan didn't just play the game of banking, he built the game.
JP Morgan.
And in this video, we're breaking down exactly how he rose to power, took control of Wall Street, and created a financial empire that still dominates the world today. But Morgan's empire didn't start with saving America. It started with making money off America's bloodiest war. In 1861, while other 24-year-olds were dying at Bull Run, Morgan was buying 5,000 defective rifles from the U.S. Army for $3.50 each, then selling them right back to desperate Union generals for $22 each. When confronted about the rifles jamming and injuring soldiers, Morgan's response was ice cold. The government got what it paid for. This wasn't just war profiteering. This was Morgan learning the most important lesson of his life. In chaos, there's profit, but only if you're ruthless enough to take it. And this mindset would reshape American banking forever. Fast forward to 1869, and America is going railroad crazy. But here's the problem. Building a transcontinental railroad costs about $100 million, which is more money than most countries had back then. Traditional banks couldn't handle deals this massive, but Morgan could, thanks to his father's London connections. But Morgan did something revolutionary. Instead of just lending money and hoping for the best, he demanded control. When he financed the Albany and Susquehanna Railroad in 1869, armed militias were literally fighting over control of the tracks. Morgan didn't just provide money. He brought in his own private army, took physical control of the railroad, and restructured the entire company. This created what became known as Morganization. The idea that banks shouldn't just lend money, they should control how that money gets used. This single concept is why today's investment banks have so much power over the companies they finance. Morgan invented modern corporate control, the $480 million handshake. But the deal that really shows Morgan's genius happened on a golf course in 1900. Andrew Carnegie, the Steel King, is ready to retire but refuses to sell to Morgan, who he sees as just a money man. So Morgan sends Charles Schwab to play golf with Carnegie and casually mentions that maybe it's time to sell. Carnegie writes his price on a scrap of paper, $480 million. That's $15 billion in today's money. When Schwab brings this to Morgan, the man doesn't even blink. "I accept," he says, and creates U.S. Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. But here's the kicker. Morgan immediately merges U.S. Steel with 10 other companies he secretly owned, giving him control of 67% of all American steel production. This wasn't just a business deal. This was Morgan showing that he could create monopolies so fast that the government couldn't stop him. And this playbook of rapid consolidation? That's exactly how modern mega mergers work today. The night Morgan became America's central bank, November 2nd, 1907, 11 p.m. The Trust Company of America is about to collapse, and if it goes down, it'll take the entire banking system with it. There's no Federal Reserve, no government bailout fund, just panic. So Morgan does something that would be illegal today. He becomes America's central bank for one night. He marches into the Trust Company's offices with his own accountants, spends 3 hours going through their books by candlelight, and declares, "This institution is solvent." Then he literally forces every other major banker in New York to contribute to a bailout fund. Not by asking, but by locking them in his library until they agreed. By dawn, he's raised $25 million and saved the entire financial system. But here's the crazy part. While he's saving the economy, Morgan is also making side deals. He forces the city of New York to buy bonds from his firm to stay solvent, and he acquires Tennessee Coal and Iron Company for pennies on the dollar by threatening to let their bank fail if they don't sell. Morgan didn't just prevent a depression, he profited from preventing it. This night literally created the blueprint for modern banking regulation. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was written specifically because Congress realized that no private citizen should have the power to single-handedly save or destroy the American economy. The day America became JP Morgan's debtor, February 8th, 1895. The United States government is literally bankrupt. The Treasury has only $9 million in gold left, and they need $100 million to maintain the gold standard. If they can't get it, the dollar becomes worthless overnight. President Cleveland has two options: let America's currency collapse or call J.P. Morgan. Morgan arrives at the White House with a briefcase containing a check for $65 million in gold, more than the entire federal budget. But his terms are brutal. He wants to buy government bonds at 30% below market value, guaranteeing himself a $7 million profit. Cleveland has no choice but to agree. Think about this. The President of the United States had to personally negotiate with a private banker to save the country's currency. Morgan had become more powerful than the government itself. And this deal established the precedent that private banks could profit from government crises, a principle that's still causing controversy today with bank bailouts. The Titanic gamble that defined modern risk, April 10, 1912. Morgan is supposed to board the Titanic for its maiden voyage. His personal suite is reserved, his luggage is packed, but at the last minute, he cancels, claiming illness. 3 days later, the unsinkable ship hits an iceberg. But here's what most people don't know. Morgan didn't just have a ticket on the Titanic, he financed the entire international mercantile marine company that owned the ship. When it sank, Morgan lost millions, but he'd structured the deal so that his personal risk was minimal while other investors took the hit. This became the Morgan Doctrine: always be prepared for the worst-case scenario and always make sure someone else pays for your mistakes. Sound familiar? It's exactly how modern investment banks structure their deals: maximum reward, minimum personal risk. The congressional showdown that changed everything. December 19th, 1912. J.P. Morgan walks into a congressional hearing room to face the Pujo Committee, which is investigating his money trust. The 75-year-old Morgan is sick, tired, and facing the biggest challenge to his power in decades. Congressman Arsène Pujo asks him directly, "Do you think you have too much power?" Morgan's response is legendary: "I do not think any man can have too much power." But the committee's investigation reveals the shocking truth. Morgan and his allies control 341 directorships in 112 corporations worth $22 billion, 3 times the value of all property in New York State. They discover that Morgan's network controls 18% of all banking resources in America through just 34 men. This hearing didn't just expose Morgan's power, it created modern antitrust law. Every regulation about bank size limits, every rule about conflicts of interest, every law about financial transparency came from this moment when America finally saw how much power one man had accumulated. The death that ended an era. March 31st, 1913. J.P. Morgan dies in Rome just months after his congressional grilling and weeks before the Federal Reserve Act becomes law. His last words? "I have done my best." But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. When they read Morgan's will, they discovered he personally owned only $80 million. For a man who controlled billions, his personal wealth was surprisingly small. The real revelation? Morgan's power came from controlling other people's money, not from owning it himself. This is the template for modern investment banking. Use leverage, not capital. Control assets, don't own them. Maximize influence while minimizing personal risk. Every major bank today follows the Morgan playbook. Why this still matters today? Here's the mind-blowing part. J.P. Morgan Chase, the bank that bears his name today, is worth $460 billion. That's bigger than the entire economy of most countries. But they're not alone. In 2008, when the financial system nearly collapsed again, what happened? The government bailed out banks that were too big to fail, using the exact same logic Morgan used in 1907. Morgan's 3 revolutionary ideas literally created modern banking. First, banks should control companies, not just lend to them. Second, in a crisis, consolidate power while everyone else panics. Third, always make sure your profits are private, but your losses can be socialized. Sound familiar? That's because we're still living in J.P. Morgan's world. When Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan Chase makes billion-dollar trades with taxpayer-backed deposits, that's Morgan's playbook. When banks become too big to fail and require government bailouts, that's Morgan's legacy. When a handful of financial institutions control most of America's capital, that's the empire Morgan built. The ultimate power move. But here's what makes Morgan's story so incredible. He didn't just build a banking empire, he taught America that financial power trumps political power. Presidents came to him for help. Congress investigated him but couldn't stop him. The government needed him more than he needed them. Morgan proved that in capitalism, whoever controls the money controls everything else. And that lesson, that private financial power can be more important than democratic government, is still shaping America today. Every time you hear about Wall Street having too much influence in Washington, every time a bank is deemed too big to fail, every time private equity firms buy up entire industries, That's J.P. Morgan's ghost still running the show, more than a century after his death. The man who started by selling broken rifles to his own government ended up creating a financial system so powerful that it outlasted him by over 100 years. And honestly, I don't think we've seen the end of his influence yet. If this story blew your mind like it did mine, smash that like button and subscribe, because I've got more stories about the people who secretly run America. And let me know in the comments. Do you think today's mega banks have too much power, or are they just following the Morgan playbook? The guy's been dead for over a century, but his empire is still growing. That's either genius or terrifying, maybe both.